Hello YouTube, welcome back. Sorry it took me so long to get this last video done. Tried to figure out how to do all this without editing, and I don't think I can, so I'm going to do my best at just splicing a whole bunch of video and still photos together to try and give you some idea of what I've done. Probably the first thing probably need to do is discuss, my train of thoughts as to why I went the way I went. The 1FZJ79R is a great tractor motor. I guess it's the best way you could put it. It doesn't rev out really well. I found it was sort of out of breath about 4,000 RPM. Now my motor had done 472,000 kilometers, but I'd compression checked it. It was excellent compression. It was well maintained, and in good running condition. But again, it was done 470, so who knows how much power it had lost. It was it was okay power, but I wouldn't say it had an abundance of power. I tow a small off-road caravan travel trailer, and I just wanted something that could tow easily. Now the original motor, the 1FZ, they are not renowned to be fuel efficient. I was getting on the highway maybe 18 liters per 100 kilometers. No better than that, certainly. And as soon as you started throwing hills or headwinds in, it just went up from that. Towing my little caravan, which only weighs about 1,400 kilos, I'd be getting 25 on the highway. If I got a headwind, I could go up to 30 liters per 100 kilometers. So less than ideal. One of the things with the manual transmission, because it's got 4.3 to 1 diff ratios, at 100 kilometers an hour it's doing 2,500 RPM. Less than ideal. And certainly if I had to put just this motor in with a manual transmission, that really wouldn't have been ideal. So maybe I could have changed the axle ratios, but I used a axle ratio converter or calculator, and you had to change the axle ratios considerably to get the manual down to more acceptable RPM, in other words, below about 2,000. With the automatic, I chose, I'm a firm believer that automatics are better off-road than manuals, certainly going uphill. Yes, absolutely agree, going downhill, they probably are, well, not probably, they definitely are not as good as manuals, but I haven't found many people that actually get stuck going downhill. So, trade-offs, and what floats your boat, I guess. But I believe the automatic, and then the automatic that I chose, the 6L80, with its ratios. The first gear is very low, and the overdrive is quite high. So with this, as I've got, I'm doing just under 2,000 RPM at 100 kilometers an hour, which I think is pretty good, especially considering it's geared to travel, tow the travel trailer caravan. With regard to the new engine, now these engines are almost doubled in price since I bought it just over a year ago. So I think the calculations and the practicality of it, has changed. When I bought it, it was what, 8,750. And had I got a really the transmission as advertised, in other words rebuilt and actually working, which I paid $4,000 for, you know, $12,000 for a new motor. Of course, I had to buy all the ancillaries, you know, so the alternator, the power steering pump, the air conditioning compressor, and the starter. But everything else, you know, like fuel injectors, all brand new. A lot of people say it's much better and easier to get a donor car and get everything off that. Absolutely agree. It would be much easier and cheaper. But you know, you've got a car or an engine which is, you know, 6, 8, 10 years old, and what's it worth having a brand new motor? And well, I've got a brand new transmission now, but you know, that certainly blew my budget. In regards to automatic transmissions, you know, there's obviously, you know, you can do whatever you like, and so the sky's the limit. But with these motors, you're either going to be talking the 4L60, 4L80, or the 6L8090. I went to the 6-speed for a few reasons. One, it's a more modern transmission. Two, the has a lower first gear and a higher sixth gear or overdrive. The other thing I've heard, and I cannot speak from experience, but the 4L60, 4L80s have a very wide oil pan, and there's a organization in Melbourne, was it Wholesale Automatics, who sell a deep pan for their 4L60s, which has a cutout for the propeller shaft, drive shaft. I didn't want to go that way, so that put me off that one. But certainly the 4L60, 4L80s would be much easier to put in, because I did have issues with trying to mate up the Techem software and my engine computer. So they're talking exactly the same language. God knows why General Motors do it that way, but we deal with what we got. So you have to get a matching. There are plenty of videos online of how to adapt the drive systems for you know, this motor. As I said, I've used a truck, US truck accessory drive that stepped everything forward about 1.5 inches, or exactly 1.5 inches. That meant the water pump needed to be stepped forward. I could have fitted a truck water pump, but I had a brand new water pump, so I just got some 1.5 inch bases, stepped it forward. And then there's a, right here, that's where your normal idler pulley is, and it has to be relocated down to here. And so I think it was Dirty Dingo, I just bought a relocation kit. That idler pulley is off a diesel Jeep, but it was brand new and I had it sitting around, so I just used it. Obviously the harmonic balancer has to be changed as well. Then that's largely it. I did have to, you can see down there, the swivel lower radiator inlet to the motor. I put a swivel one in there because the stock one clashed with the air conditioning lines that are largely in stock position still. The cooling system, I used the terrain chamber aluminium heavy-duty radiator. So far, the engine coolant temperatures have not got out of control at all. It's working really well. You can see I've used the stock cowling, and I just made an adapter plate to go in where the original fan was. You can see those stainless steel headed buttons, screws hold that plate in, and then I cut a 16-inch hole in that and used the 16-inch thermatic fan. It's 2600 CFM, and as I say, it's controlled by the engine computer and a relay, and comes on and off and does exactly what it's supposed to do, and it's running really well. It also comes on permanently when the air conditioning compressor is running. And that's all controlled by the relay box and the computer and things. The hoses, the top hose is just a stock Holden or Pontiac G8 top hose, and then I've just cut a section out, put a barb joiner in there, and it works perfectly. The lower hose is off a 4.2 litre diesel, like a 1FZ, not 1FZ, 1HD Landcruiser, like one of these. You can see I've got this top plate here. This is a piece of aluminium angle because this radiator has two mounting holes for the shroud, which is there and over here, whereas my stock shroud has one bolt there, so I just covered that across. And again, as I say, everything's working just what I need. The air inlet for the motor, obviously it's just a 90-degree silicone. This is the crankcase ventilation, the mass airflow sensor, and this I got this standard Commodore air inlet, which is normally over the other side, and I cut it right here and then joined these two because God knows why, but General Motors, the size of that is different from the size of that, which is different from the size of that, which is different, obviously, to the size of the Toyota. The Toyota air cleaner I cut off to the widest point, and that's working well. But I just glued these two pieces together with instant glue, and then use this high-performance rubber glue to further glue it and seal it, and that's working well. Okay, engine mounts. I'll have to show some still photos to what I did here, but essentially I used the stock engine mounts and just built a like adapter to go between those and small block Chevy, and then I use another adapter plate to go between the small block Chevy and the LS. The engine mounts, though, I did have to, well, arguably I probably didn't have to do the right hand side over well, you could call this the left hand side. This is the passenger side in Australia. This one is just moved forward about 10 mils, and I probably could have left that one alone. But the one on this side is double wide to allow for whether it's the petrol 1FZ or the diesel 1HD motor. And that mount would clash with the air conditioning compressor. So it had to come off, so I pulled them both off. I shortened the one on the driver's side and then welded it in place. So essentially I put the motor and transmission with the transfer case in mounted in place, and then that established where I had to actually put the engine mounts, and that worked well. I did have to mount the motor as high as I could in the engine bay, and so the alternator is about 20 mils below the bonnet hood. Ideally, it could have gone lower, because there's a cross base there, and with the harmonic balancer, I could have lowered the motor about 60 mils. But, and I'll show you later, there's a real issue with fitting these with the 6L80 and the clearance of the drive shaft, front drive shaft. And I'll talk about that in a little while. Okay, the front drive shaft issue. What I noticed was, firstly, the drive shaft, I had to flick it around because so the narrower tube is at the front and the fatter tube's at the back, because right there is the bell housing, and on the bell housing there's a cast-on lug. You can just see the one on the other side. There's a cast-on lug which really clashes with the drive shaft when you lower it, when you hit a large bump. What I actually did was pull the springs and shocks off and lowered it right down to the bump stop to establish how high I had to lift the motor to clear that, and I also had to cut that lug or boss off the off the transmission bell housing. It was the only thing I found that really didn't feel like the engine belonged in here. Apart from that, everything else, it just felt like the engine was totally at home. In lifting the motor, I still checked the pinion angles, and they're still well within spec, so no harm there. In regards to the adapter, I use the Marks adapter. What surprised me with Marks is their knowledge, I thought, was left a little bit to be desired. For example, they did not believe that their adapter and the 6L80E would bolt up to my original transfer case. They told me I was going to have to buy a transfer case off a FZJ79. That's not the case with the 1FZ. If it had been the 1HZ, the early model non-turbo diesel, they have a, I think it's an R150 gearboxes, whereas this vehicle had the H150, 151. And the output splines are quite different on those two transmissions. So you really have to do your homework, or like I did, just suck eggs and see. When I got it here, I modified the transmission. I cut the transmission shaft and put the adapter on it, and it goes straight in. So saved myself $3,000 there. But I tried to give Marks as much technical feedback as I could, in the end I stopped because I found they weren't listening, and I found that their knowledge was not that good. You know, for example, I had to put a new sump on this to clear the steering and axle, and I could have got some other ones. There are some other ones around that I think could fit, but theirs was off the shelf. It was in Australia. It was expensive, but anyway, I bought theirs. And what I found was this motor's a AFM or DOD. Now, I haven't activated that, of course, as the wiring doesn't even go to it. And I feel that as long as you don't actually activate those solenoid valves or pressure valves, it shouldn't fail. So I've left it as is, and it should be fine. But in the pan, I noticed with the stock pan when I pulled it off, there was a pressure relief valve. The Marks one did not come with it. When I spoke to them about it, they told me that the pressure relief is in the oil filter. Well, I don't know who's going to convince me that's true, because it's not. There's a pressure relief valve, bypass valve, so if the filter gets blocked, it will still let oil flow through. But the pressure relief valve is to stop stop high pressure from damaging your AFM solenoid or hydraulic solenoids. Apparently they can only take about 75 psi of oil pressure. Now in Australia, when we don't get really sub-zero temperatures and things that make oil get pretty thick, I doubt very much whether, even if you left that pressure release valve off, it would cause any problems. But General Motors put it there. I wanted it there. Anyway, I spoke to them and they said there was no need, and I was wrong, and all I need to do is use the right oil filter. Well, we had a few arguments, and that's the last time I spoke to Marks about this. To me, it showed that they really did not understand engineering, or I don't. And if somebody is willing to enlighten me as to how an oil filter can actually restrict the oil pressure and reduce the oil pressure, I'll be happy to listen. Anyway, so I fitted that valve, pressure relief valve myself. I was not happy having to drill into and tap into a brand new sump pan that, had I got it wrong, I'm sure Marks would have said tough. They weren't going to cover it with any sort of warranty. So I'm on my own. Anyway, I did that, and everything is working as advertised. Again, I'll show some photos of what I did to put that valve in the Marks pan. Okay, exhaust system. I ended up finding these shorty stainless steel. I'm not sure if you can actually see those with the lights, sorry. I'll put some still photos of them, but I guess you could describe them as being suitable for an S10, a Chevy S10 conversion. You needed to shoot the exhaust further back at like 45 degrees. The stock exhaust manifolds pretty well go straight down, but they're also too wide for the chassis rails. You'll collide with the chassis rails. I also got hold of some LS1 Commodore exhaust manifolds, and they fire back a little bit. I tilted back a little bit more, but still not enough, and again too wide. So the manifolds that I got in, they work well. Actually perfect, and I'll show again photos, but essentially what I did was I put some large pieces of cardboard on the exhaust manifold bolts, and then drew where I needed the exhaust to go, and then I matched that photo up with photos I was getting on eBay, and as I said, it worked well. The rest of the exhaust, I used 304, I think it's 304 stainless steel mandrel bent, and after I got the approximate lengths sorted out, I just got them expanded, so they provide slip joints, and that just gave you a lot of opportunity to you know, get your lengths exactly right, your angles exactly right, and then tack weld it all in place, and then finish welding it. And that worked really well. And I'll show you the exhaust. They're identical on both sides. So I come out in between the what do you call them, the radius arms of the front suspension. There's just enough room to get them. This exhaust is 3-inch. And then the catalytic converter. I've got hot dogs on each side just to cut down the noise, and then it tucks back up. On the driver's side, it's really in the original location. It's used original mounts, and I just had to duplicate it over this side. And then you come into a Y, and from this point onwards, it's a stock stainless steel exhaust off a well, aftermarket. I won't say stock. It's aftermarket for a 2017 FZJ79R. I had to shorten that little gap between the muffler and those flanges, and just welded those up, and then all the rest sorry about the light. All the rest is just standard. That's a 4-inch exhaust, and it sounds good. It's a big muffler, but it's essentially a straight through muffler with a you know, like a S-bend in it, and works well. For the transmission cooler, I use this adapter manifold that just bolts straight on, and then dash 8 AN stainless steel braided hoses, and the transmission cooler is at the back under the tray. What I've used is 2 airflow thermatic fan controlled oil coolers, and I just sandwich them together. As I say, they're under the tray, but I eventually am thinking I'll get one of those under tray toolboxes and actually put the coolers in there so they're better protected from mud and rocks and sticks and all that sort of stuff. And I think that'll work well. But so far, as I say, there's a thermatic switch which I ran through a relay, and when you're running, a temperature of the transmission fluid runs between 83 and about 89 degrees. It just cycles in there and works well. So these are the Aeroflow transmission coolers. You can see the thermatic switch there. I used a relay. It was left over from the original fuel system relay. And there's another cooler sandwiched and bolted to the top. It was running fine with just one, but I just felt that I hadn't really been pushing it like high temperatures in low range off-road in sand or something like that. And so I just sandwiched another one to the top of that, and it gave me a spare fan. So as I said, when I move it over to a under tray toolbox, I mount them in there, I'll actually put both fans in, and if one fails I can just easily switch over to the other fan. So it gives me a level of another level of redundancy. For the fuel pressure regulator, some LS motors use a return line from the actual motor. The L77 I'm using is a deadhead non-return, so I needed a regulator. Originally tried a couple of those Corvette combined filter / regulators. I found they were actually junk. The pressure regulation was not that good, and it was a really neat fit up in here. I did away with the stock filter. That's one with the yellow there. I did away with the stock filter and used those, and it was a really nice fit, but just didn't work to my satisfaction anyway. So you can see I used an aeroflow regulator, and it's I don't know if you could say perfect, but working as good as anybody can expect. Yeah, keeps the pressures spot on, 53 psi. With the wiring, I just got a standalone wiring loom. Now, so many of these is really designed for the computer to go under the dash. There's absolutely no room to do that. So I've mounted mine there. You can see I just used the aluminium plate with some spacers because nothing's flat down there, of course, and put my computer right there. I did have to waterproof all the connectors. All the empty pins were empty, and they need to be blocked off. So I've blocked all those off and waterproofed it, and I think it should be perfect. I did go into the wiring loom, like it pulled the power from the starter motor over the other side, whereas my battery's right here. So I just saw no point in running a heavy power cable over to the starter motor and then all the way back again. So that's how I did that. And I adjusted the wiring loom so all the length of the tails going to all the connectors were perfect. This little, while I'm pointing at it, that little yellow piece of hose, that's a 6AN or AN-6 fuel fitting going to the fuel rail, and they sort of like screw on. And I found that thing can actually unscrew, and I think it would be kind of exciting having your petrol squirting all over your motor. So I made up that little piece of hose which locks into the screw thread of the -6 fitting, and now also you can see I've marked it with a little dab of paint, so I can make sure that thing never comes undone as well. And then you see I also used some nylon tie wraps just to be made double sure, because when I found that almost off, I was not a happy camper, and I wanted to make sure that was never going to come off again. Now with the air conditioning, I'm going to have to use a few stills here, but essentially I put a stock Chevy Silverado compressor in there, and there's a manifold which took the hoses to, they call them MIOR, male insert O-ring connections. But then where it adapts to there, you can see that I had to weld on or adapt to go between these pad type Toyota air conditioning fittings to the MIOR. And then I just use these, I think it's Speedy Air, I think they're from Queensland, but they supplied the kit to make up my own hoses. I originally paid a guy to make the hoses. He made it out of hoses twice as thick as these, and they were wrong size, and he just crimped it up to make it look like they would work, and they were also the wrong length, and they were the wrong angles. That was a learning curve. Don't trust other people. So in addition to the new compressor, it's got a new condenser, new receiver dryer, and I pulled the evaporator box off underneath the dash and replaced the TX valve. So all of that is new. One of the things I did find is the power going to, now I had to get that relay box to talk to my, they call it an amplifier, which is under the dash, where the original, you know, the temperature knob and on-off switch go to, which is under the dash. And then that supposedly provides a power to the clutch on the compressor. Well, I had to get that to talk to the under dash component, and then I used a relay that was in there to switch the actual compressor on and off. But what I was finding, I was getting voltage spikes, so I had to put a blocking diode up in the wiring loom here, because the computer did not like those voltage spikes. But that fixed that, and all's good. You know, everybody will tell you that there's a bunch of wiring to do. I'll show you photos of the under dash wiring. We're trying to get all of that, and I also had to, for those who know, the one I said have a couple of relays which are underneath here, which for the fuel switchover system. There's a resistor that gets switched in line to reduce the fuel pressure when it's idling. It's all controlled by the computer. I ripped all of it out, and I've just put relays in underneath, so my switchover between front and rear tank work as advertised without any computer being involved. And the interface that I did between the bulkhead and the wiring inside the cab and the new engine loom, I use Deutsch waterproof connectors. You know, so your you know, all your wiring that goes between the engine bay and there have connectors here, so you can just pull everything out quite easily. But it's you know, I have an electronics background, so the wiring was not hard. It was just something you had to wade through. If you're not comfortable with that, you're going to have to pay somebody. Oh, also while I'm looking down there, you can see these ceramic spark plug leads. I had to get those because these shorty standstill headers, you know, got in the way of the stock spark plug leads. So these little, I think it cost me about $100 for a set, and they're working fine, and they allow it to be perfectly, you know, fit in there perfectly. And you can change the spark plugs. I've already, when I originally got the motor in and was priming the oil pressure, I pulled the spark plugs out just so I could crank it easily. And so it's quite easy to get the spark plugs out both sides. I must say it's actually probably easier than even the one I've said, where they're right on the top but covered with covers. this is one area where I really had to get quite creative. That's the shifter for the low range four-wheel drive. On like 80 series and other Landcruisers, that shifter is mounted on top of the transfer case gearbox adapter. On this model, there are bolt bosses on the actual gearbox where that is bolted to. Obviously with the 6L80E I didn't have anywhere strong to mount that to. So trying to figure out how to hang that in midair and still be strong, not flex, and give me good shifting in the original position was a challenge. I ended up making this steel plate and strap welded up contraption adapter, and it goes over to the top and actually bolts to the square boss that you see on top of the adapter, which is the closest strong place that I had to mount that. So, basically all the forces come from over there, and then from the shifter, and then they have to be supported all the way back here. I'll show you some still photos to give you an idea of what that was, but that had me thinking for a while as to how I was going to do that. But so far quite happy with that. The automatic shifter, I bought it from Pace Performance in the United States. I think it's originally designed to go in Chevy Malibus, but I think they've modified it. There's the resistor tree in the tap up, tap down, but I have not been able to get that to work with a Commodore Tecum. I've tried, and for now I've pretty well given up until I learn more. I needed to pass the engineering, I needed transmission position indicator, so I just fitted that. What I have underneath the glove box is a Dakota Digital, and again I'll show you photos of what I had to do. Even the shifter I had to modify because the shift cable output was at the wrong angle. I had to modify that. I needed to put a sensor which could tell these LEDs which position the shifter was in. But Dakota Digital were excellent there. And I also have a Dakota Digital speedometer, tachometer interface underneath the dash in front of the speedometer. I didn't need to do it. You can with the sorry, just waving around. You can with the engine computer and with HP tuners adjust the RPM to make it work, but with the tachometer that I've got. But then you also need some, I think, pull-up resistors, and the speedometer is just coming straight off the stock speedometer, so I didn't need to do anything there. But I figured by putting the Dakota Digital unit in there, I can adjust for any errors in the tachometer, which turns out there was none. But I can also adjust the speedometer for if I change the tires, like right now I'm running just over 32-inch tires, but if I go to 33s, or I can adjust the speedometer for spot on, and they have an app for that, so you don't even have to pull the dash apart to adjust it. So I really like that. Just while I'm in here, I'll show you what else I've done. I built a overhead console. Lots of people will tell you the radio speakers are terrible in these things, which they are. So I added that little sound bar, and I have a rear vision camera going out the back because of the canopy. And I put this little hole in there, so I'm not sure if you can see, but I've got USB charging up there, so I can put my phones and GPSs, everything like that, up in there, and they can charge away to their heart's content. And that works well. Obviously center console, and I put these bucket seats in, again all approved by the engineer. They're actually out of a little Toyota, but more comfortable and nice. I thought I'd may as well show you a little bit more of the truck and what I've done. Now I've got this aluminium canopy on it. It's a cheap Chinese one, and a lot of people say, oh, they crack, and they certainly will, unless you put that piece of plywood right in there, and that braces the fore-aft movement. So if you put a rooftop tent or something like that on one of these, you will certainly crack the welds on all the corners. But with that piece of plywood, it's going nowhere, and I've had absolutely no trouble. It seals the dust. So you can see that I've got a refrigerator in there, a solar charger. I've got 360 watts, about 360 watts of solar on the roof. Got an awning on this side. Got a shower awning on the back. And then on this side, you see I've got that rail there so I can fasten stuff to. I'm just using bins right now. I'm probably going to make a drawer system to go in there. I've got one spare tire, but I can actually fit 2 spare tires in there, move the bins back a little bit, and give me nice flexible. Well, and I didn't mention, on the other side by the behind the refrigerator is where I can put a mattress, and I sleep in here when I'm going solo camping. Anyway, that's largely it. Feel free to ask some questions. I think it was Guillermo who might have asked me a question that YouTube didn't like. I got an indication that I got an extra question, but I couldn't see it. The question or comment count was up, but I couldn't see that last comment, and then it stayed there for about 2 weeks, and then it seemed to disappear. So maybe if it was Guillermo trying to send me his email address, you can't do that. YouTube won't allow you, and I couldn't figure out a way for us to communicate directly. But anyway, as I said, Guillermo, if you've got some more questions, just ask me through the comments, and I'm happy to answer what I can. As I said, though, Guillermo has got I think it was a 10-year earlier model of one of these, and they're quite, I don't know what the transmission is, I don't know what the transfer case is. You'd have to, if you're in the States, I would call Advanced Adapters and ask them, what sort of adapter you need. But apart from that, the fitting should be the same. Anyway, gents and ladies, if you're watching, thank you very much. And unless I get more questions, I probably won't do any more. I'm certainly not in the business of doing YouTube.